Greetings, and allow for me to introduce to you
Jesus was a 5'4", brown-skinned socialist. Nothing like the white man on that crucifix. The truth is there, you just won't notice it.
I, Cosmic, will be covering various world stories from spanning the globe with a semi-silly socialist perspective. Everyone has an agenda, so before I begin, I think it's fair that I share with you mine. I am a humanist who is a socialist because I measure morality based off of whether it benefits humanity or causes humanity suffering. Those are the two ends of my moral compass. I believe that the current power structures in place do not serve the collective well-being of most of us and thus our species, and I believe we could accomplish so much more and alleviate so much human suffering that comes naturally with existence if we all work together and committed to doing the right thing. Anywho, my plan was to cover a series of stories from last week that occurred between the dates of September 7th and September 13th. I was going to discuss Charlie Kirk's murder, newly discovered signs of life on Mars, the turmoils of Nepal and Indonesia, the collapse of the French government, Russian drones in Polish airspace, and the state of Israel's continued immorality against the Palestinians of Gaza. But so much has happened in the aftermath of Charlie Kirk's death, and I've noticed such a violent uprising in rhetoric that I believe is not healthy for our nation. So I think for today, I'm going to focus on that, and I will start covering more international world news in future installments by surrounding it. So it's only fair that we switch our little mood indicator to the toxic mushroom because things are not looking good and looking pretty scary. So the details surrounding Charlie Kirk's murder are confusing. And right now, there's a clashing of very strong emotional responses. Before I get into emotions, I just want to say to the people who downplay emotions and cast them aside as like an antithesis of logic or some like root of irrationality that no longer belongs in human consciousness, I disagree with that. I believe emotions are a powerful augmenter of reason and enhances problem-solving skills. I'm just saying, there's a reason we experience emotions, and the existence of emotions is beneficial to our existence. However, I do recognize that emotions are like a double-edged sword, meaning that if they get too powerful, they can kind of take control of you and end up causing harm. Speaking of sharing emotions, I'm sure you've seen on the internet that there are outraged individuals and groups currently clashing with overjoyed or gleeful groups and individuals. There's also camps of individuals and groups who are not really expressing any emotions, and they're kind of staying like neutral, or they're like jaded, or they're desensitized to seeing people die all the time. Keep in mind that these are just emotions that I'm observing and trying to classify, and there's a wide range of fluctuations that put people in different categories or between categories, and within categories there's different severity of expression and different intensity of expression. You know, with some people expressing like a little bit of emotion and people expressing like a lot of emotion, and there's also people with varying levels of sincerity, so you will see some people who are lying, some people who are joking, or some people who are just rage baiting for the lulz. So rather us continuing to lash out against each other and escalate the violence and the rhetoric behind hate towards one another and stay divided, I think we should try to take some calming peace to just try to understand each other and try to understand the thinking behind these range of emotions on both sides of the coin. So first off, I want to explore the expression of outrage, and I believe that expression can be easily explained. These are people who saw someone they loved or admired murdered in front of them. That's awful. That is a very traumatic sight that would leave many scarred, especially if you share a lot of the same core beliefs or all the beliefs that Charlie Kirk had. I don't think there's any way to see this other than a violent attack on your beliefs. And I think it's very easy for those individuals to relate to that and see themselves in that shoe and be scared, like, what if someone does the same thing to me because I share the same beliefs? And such violence does not solve anything. You're not going to change someone's beliefs with violence. And this violence only begets more violence and more bloodshed. And I thought that was a lesson that we as a civilization would have learned from countless examples of blood being spilled unnecessarily. Conversely, I think the expression of glee and joy can also be explained, but involves a little bit more nuance, and you might disagree with me. So let's start with what we most likely agree on, regardless of your beliefs. Individuals exist on a spectrum of good and evil, and most people believe that they are good. Without context, celebrating another individual's death is wrong. However, most of these people who are gleeful or in a celebratory mood believe Charlie Kirk was a proponent of certain ideologies that threatened their rights and the rights of their friends. The well-being of homosexual couples, transgender people, women, and racial minorities was put under threat a lot by the things and beliefs of Charlie Kirk. And a lot of my friends, classmates, and coworkers were hurt by the repetition of his words and ideas by Turning Point USA members on college campuses and online spaces. Again, I want to reiterate that his death solves nothing. In fact, it makes the problem much worse and further divides us. Especially when you have the sitting president of the US jumping on the air and saying the problem is on the left and blaming the rhetoric of the radical left for the actions of a rogue individual or a group of individuals who were able to obtain a firearm, probably under loose regulation. We also have Erica Kirk, Charlie Kirk's widow, addressing the nation. And before I continue, I just want to express that I feel terrible for her. I think what she had to go through was an awful thing, and I cannot imagine the amount of suffering and grief she is going through. However, I cannot look past her condemnation of the evildoers starting around the 740 mark and her rhetoric shortly following. Her rhetoric is of an escalating nature and dangerous. She conflates the singular person who pulled the trigger with a lot of people who simply oppose Charlie Kirk's beliefs. And I think that association may soon prove to be deadly, and people who had nothing to do with Charlie Kirk's murder are going to be under violence as well. Now, at this point in my speech, coverage, perspective, or whatever you want to call it, I was going to say something along the lines of, before more blood is shed, we should ask ourselves to what degree the shooter was acting as a rogue individual or part of a violent collective before we start blaming each other. Tragically, more have met violent deaths. I'm talking about Demartravion, Trey Reed, and Corey Zukatis. In case you don't know or haven't heard about these people, Trey was a 21-year-old student of Delta State University, and his body was found hanging from a tree near the pickleball courts yesterday on Monday, September 15th. Corey, who was a 36-year-old homeless man, was also found hanging on a tree within 4 hours of when Trey's body was found. And the distance between the two trees where both men were found hanging was 108 miles. Additionally, there are relatives of Trey saying he had broken bones, and Trey had experienced racially motivated altercations in the past within the university. So the local police have ruled both as suicides. But come on! You have two people who have no connection to one another, both found hung on trees within 110 miles of each other, which, for the record, is a 2-hour drive. Very possible for a group or a person to do both of these crimes and be able to drive between both locations. And if I had to guess the motivations of those involved, I would think it's fair to assume that they hate black people and they hate homeless people. And I tell you what, the people that most likely lynch these two need to be caught before they murder more people who they don't like for no reason. Or, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe two people within the same state happen to kill themselves in the exact same way on the exact same date within hours of each other. Regardless, this matter needs more attention, this investigation needs to be open, and we need to find out what happened.
Republican or Democrat, you get stabbed from the front or you get stabbed from the back.
Jumping back into Charlie Kirk's murder, there are a lot of weird facts surrounding the identity and the intent of the suspected shooter. And I'm only saying suspected because technically there hasn't been proven guilty yet, but this guy's gotta be the shooter. So the suspected shooter is Tyler Robinson, a 22-year-old resident of Utah. A lot of information has thus come out surrounding his identity, but there was an overwhelming bias towards classifying his political leanings. Most people on the right are saying that Tyler was a radical leftist, while people on the left are saying that he was a radical right-winger. And to be honest, I am unsure where he lies on the political spectrum because I feel like we're missing a lot of the pieces, and the pieces we do have are not fitting together, and it's a very frustrating puzzle to solve. So, for the first piece, his parents are both MAGA Republicans and Mormons, so reasonable to assume that they instilled Christian and conservative values to their son Tyler. Another piece is his voting history, which doesn't exist. This implies that during the 2024 election, Tyler was apolitical, or he was so radical that he didn't like either candidate and saw voting as a waste of time. Him being a leftist radical to me doesn't make much sense, and I'll try to explain why, but the main thing is I feel like there should be signs of like rebellion or like activism that you normally see with radical leftists who were raised under a conservative household. Maybe these signs will come out in the future as we learn more, but currently my overall impression of this suspected shooter is that he's a man who was enraged that the system wasn't really working out for him, and he was able to find relief in kind of these extremist online communities. The strongest evidence of this is what was inscribed on the bullet casings. So the one that was fired read, "Notices bulge. Oh whoa, what's this?" This is, I can't believe I have to read this. This is an overused phrase originating from the furry community, which is known to many people outside of the community. And personally, I don't feel like an actual furry would use such like a low-hanging phrase. It's just like a common reference. Now, speaking of the unfired casings, the first read, "Hey fascist, catch," with up arrow, right arrow, down, down, down. This is also confusing because we have the labeling of Kirk as a fascist, followed by sarcasm, and then we have a possible like Helldivers 2 stratagem is my best guess for the Lift 850 jump pack. Another unfired casing read, "Oh Bella Ciao, Bella Ciao, Bella Ciao, Ciao, Ciao," which is an anti-fascist folk song arising during resistance to Mussolini's reign. And then the last unfired casing read, "If you read this, you are gay. Lamau." So, when trying to piece together the madness, the common thread is overused phrases or memes of dank meme culture. And despite Uwu Speak, Helldivers 2, and Bella Ciao being anti-fascist in their core messaging, all of these expressions are prevalent in online alt-right extremist communities as well, which makes things confusing. So, because of the confusing nature of these messages and their potential connection to alt-right groups, there is some speculation that Tyler Robinson may have been recently radicalized by the Groypers, also called the Groyper Army. In case you don't know what the Groyper Army is, bless you, it is an alt-right white nationalist and Christian nationalist group led by Nick Fuentes. And the abuse of irony, aka irony poisoning, is a key characteristic of the Groyper movement. In fact, Nick has stated that irony is so important for giving a lot of cover and plausible deniability for our views. It has long since been known that the common strategy of Nicky's Groyper Army is to avoid any accountability or for offensive or inhumane beliefs by claiming that they're just joking, trolling, or being ironic, while secretly inviting those who would agree with such beliefs to join their ranks. Such a strategy is the strategy of a coward. And it's much less effective than Charlie Kirk's strategy of open but bad faith debate. Now, if I personally had to choose between the philosophies of Nick Fuentes and Charlie Kirk, I would probably have chosen Kirk over Fuentes, which is what a majority of young conservatives do as well. Following this logic to an extreme, there are some who believe that Nick Fuentes' jealousy of Charlie Kirk's success caused members of the Groyper Army to see Charlie Kirk as the greatest obstacle to their group's success. It's possible that rogue individuals of the Groyper Army collaborated to murder their dear leader's competitor. Because if you think about it, Charlie Kirk and Nick Fuentes were fierce rivals competing in similar political niches. Both were seeking to capture the hearts and minds of young conservatives who are white, straight, and Christian. But despite having the same target audience, it's important to recognize that both men do have followers that deviate from such identities. I don't know why you would join either group if you did, but it happens. So one such potential follower is Tyler Robinson. I say this because more details surrounding his personal life and social activity have come into light. So the FBI has informed all of us that Tyler was living in an apartment with a transgender woman who's currently in the process of transitioning, and that she's cooperating with the authorities. And I just want to take a moment to clarify the notation of transgender woman. This is someone who, yes, was a guy, but now identifies as a girl. So the respectable thing to do is to use she, her pronouns and to refer to her as hopefully an ex-girlfriend. I'm sorry for mansplaining gender identity, but I see too many news reports who are using the wrong pronouns after identifying her as a trans woman. Also, Tyler's probably a furry based off of his social media activity and Discord messaging and like the groups that he has been involved with in recent years. Because of this, some people are saying that Tyler being a furry and dating a woman who happens to be transgender automatically makes him a leftist. However, there are individuals in alt-right groups who are also gay or furries. I mean, look at 4chan or green text if you don't believe me. I have observed this weird fixation of young alt-righters who maybe struggle with intimacy or struggle with finding a partner, who think of exploring their sexuality, but they don't want to be gay. One example is this like fierce objectification and like fascination with like feminine men or transgender women, and usually these alt-righters will label them as femboys, which is offensive to a certain group of individuals. But they'll do this while insisting they're not gay. Fellas, it's 2025. it's okay to be gay. You don't need to join an extremist alt-right movement and suppress your beliefs, and feelings like that. Like, just let him out, But, more serious note, while the motivation, political leanings, and identity of Tyler Robinson has been my focus towards the end of this coverage, it's only necessary for the determination of whether he acted alone or if others were involved. Please don't look at the behavior of a single individual and conflate that with the nature of everyone who shares an identity. That's association bias, aka guilt by association. There are evil and demented people in every community, in every identity, just as there are righteous people in most communities and every identity. So, whether you think Tyler is a radical right-winger, radical leftist, or crazy, don't blame the entire community or individuals of the shared identity for his violent actions. I think we should unite, we should cooperate with one another, even if we have different ideological differences. We can get to the bottom of this, and we can do our best to prevent such tragedies from happening again. But if we remain divided, we don't act, there's going to be more suffering, and there's going to be more unnecessary bloodshed. So, I'm hoping that you learn from this, and you're willing to engage with someone who disagrees with you. Have a good day.